Okay, so I'm continuing on with knife cuts. I'm gonna slice some shiitake mushrooms. I cleaned most of them, but I just wanted to show you that you do have to take the stem off of these shiitakes, whereas with a button, the stem is definitely edible. There's not to say that there isn't flavor in here. We could certainly save this for a stock if we wanted to, but not something that we're gonna wanna cook and saute and then eat. Now I'm just gonna take these and do a really simple thin slice. I'm not gonna go crazy thin because I want these to have a little bit of texture. I'd say probably an eighth of an inch, maybe just shy, maybe just a little bit thicker than an eighth of an inch. Trying to showcase some flavors of the Pacific Northwest in this dish, and mushrooms are definitely an ingredient that's showcased. Definitely an ingredient that is celebrated in the Pacific Northwest. There's so many different varieties of wild mushrooms, and shiitakes are actually one of those mushrooms that grows wild and abundantly wild, and they are really something so different on the West Coast than they are here on the East Coast. These are really nice, but I'm telling you, they really are like a whole different animal. Okay, so I'm gonna put these aside for sauteing later. Next, I'm gonna move on to some components. These are all garnishing components for the salmon. This was that other part of the cucumber. I think what I'm gonna do is just peel a little bit, kind of like a stripe technique, peeling like, I don't know, 3 peels off of it. And I think we'll do, let's go half moons, thin sliced. This is gonna be a quick pickle that we'll do. Because it's a pickle, maybe I'll go just a little bit thicker because we're gonna apply heat to these and we want them to retain just a little bit of crunch. I think having that peel on is nice visually for sure. Take these and put it into this bowl over here. We're gonna eventually make a pickling liquid that will pour right over the top. Next, gonna move on to scallions. I like to keep my scallions intact like this. Like I'll keep the rubber band on. It helps me when if I'm doing like a nice thinly sliced. I may switch to my chef's knife for this, and I even prefer a slicer when I'm slicing scallions nice and thin. I'll save these just for a stock or even any number of things. I like to kind of start with a nice even cut like that if I'm doing thin sliced. And you can see that rubber band really is helping me out. That's why I just, rather than like doing this one scallion at a time, you want to keep them all next to each other. And don't neglect these nice light green parts. Still really tasty down here. It's actually like more pungent, I find, the lighter it gets. Now if we have to, we could take this rubber band off, lay them side by side next to each other. Now I might switch back. You could go at a bias or straight up and down. Either one works. Something about the whites I like kind of going straight up and down. They're usually a little bit more fibrous. Okay. Nice thinly sliced scallions. Is actually going to make like a little relish. It's going to be another garnish. Lots of garnishes that really do add quite a lot of flavor. I tend to try and make sure that garnishes have a purpose. Okay, next we're going to do some chopped thyme. With time, sometimes I don't mind having a little bit of stem. It totally depends on like how old the thyme is. Like this one is really, really woody, and so I definitely don't want that stem in there. But the little branches, I can run my knife through it, and there's actually quite a lot of flavor in some of those branches. And so a piece like this, it's much more like delicate stem. I'm not gonna get super concerned if there's a little bit of stem in it at the end or if there's stem in those branches. I'd much rather, in most settings, it's really more about trying just to get the job done. And you're losing product that's flavorful in most settings if you're throwing out, you know, all the branches and just using the individual leaves of thyme. You're also wasting a huge amount of time picking it. So just gonna run my knife back and forth quickly. I will want to make sure that I'm chopping it pretty fine. If there's stems in it, you know, those stems are not going to be tasty and not going to be palatable if you're picking them out of your teeth. And so you want them nice and small. Then they just kind of break right down into whatever you're cooking. Okay. And I'm going to take this, just going to go right over the top of my carrots and my parsnips. Potatoes are already in there. Okay, next up. First, always nice to straighten up in between tasks, even at home. Even more so at home, because wait till you see how much of a mess you make. It's harder cooking at home and keeping clean for sure. Okay, next I'm gonna work on the ginger. I could use a peeler. I also think a really nice tip is just to use a spoon. I find that the spoon works a little bit easier, and I'll do this on the cutting board just so that you can kind of see. But I just use the spoon to kind of pull that peel right off. Typically, I'll kind of pull like the nubs off so it's a little easier to dig the skin off, because lots of the times there's little knobs all over the edge of a piece of ginger. You can save those for stocks, bone broth, even like ginger juice. Okay, take those peels into the trash. I'm gonna do a really, really, really fine mince, even like closer to like a brunoise with this. I think the more delicate and precise you are with the cut, the better this sauce is. It's definitely a different take on a sauce. And if you're real sloppy with the cuts, and it's the scallion and the ginger, then the effect of the sauce is very, very different. And so it is really worth taking your time to make the cuts really precise and tiny, fine. And, you know, you could definitely get a finer product from using a microplane, but you do want the texture of the ginger too for this sauce, so. Okay, keep going with the planks. Smells so nice. Lining up my strips. Keeping my fingers curved, keeping them protected. When you're doing these cuts like this, really important. You're not going to be able to get them as precise if you don't have the right form. You're also not going to be able to keep your fingertips. Win-win. Or loss. Loss. Let's see. Do at least one more vertical. Sometimes you have to move it around in order to find the safest way to cut it, to cut those planks, to find those flat surfaces rather than having something rounded sitting on its rounded edge. Sometimes you gotta move it around a little bit. And the formula is gonna change sometimes. Don't let it get sloppy at the end, even if it wants to. Stay true. Okay, we got a nice fine broom wall. Ginger. Okay, next up I'm just gonna do just a little bit of radish, likely something that I'll use for garnish. Not something that you'll see in the recipe, but I know I have an extra radish, and I also know that it goes with all these flavors, and so why not just use just a little bit of it as a delicate garnish at the end. And so I'm thinking just some little like pies, not many. So I need to get a wedge first. And what I'll do is I'll place them in one of these little cup containers, and I'm gonna put some paper towel, damp paper towel, over the top of it until I'm ready to use it, and that will stop it from like getting limp or drying out. Just keep it nice and hydrated and juicy looking until the time I'm ready to use it. And I think for two, that's plenty. Save the rest for a salad. Okay. And that, I will also do one more knife cut, and that will conclude, but I want to make sure that I put some gloves on. If you don't have gloves at home, I would just say make sure whenever you're cutting beets, have that be the last job that you're doing. It's gonna mess your cutting board up. You'll certainly have to clean it, and your hands are gonna get real dirty too, so make sure you're like washing your hands right after you're using it. It's also gonna dye your knife, so you'll wanna wash your knife really good, even if it looks clean. Some of the residue stays inside the knife itself. I'm thinking probably just wedges with this. I mean, you could do slices too, but this is gonna be a garnish that's gonna be going with the salmon, so you could potentially do a variety, and then you have a couple different visual textures and options to use. So maybe I'll do a bunch of wedges and then just a few. Some wedges are small. Maybe this one I'll just do 2 out of it. And then this one, I'm gonna do some slices. Kind of thick cut. Let's say that's gonna be scrap. I will eventually marinate these beets, but you want to be careful not to marinate them too early because they bleed. As soon as you put acid on them, salt on them, sugar on them, they're going to start to leach out liquid, and you don't want that. It starts to actually break down the beet too, so we'll wait to marinate them until right before we're ready to plate them. We'll take a little break.